Ladies and gentlemen, after the short coffee break, let's wake up and start the session with energy. Our program will continue with the political plenary fireside chat session. First of all, to deliver his speech, I would like to kindly invite Honorable Ambassador Can Bes to the stage.
Hanımefendiler, beyefendiler, hoş geldiniz. Good morning. Very good to see so many friends and familiar faces and to be back in this setting again. And I want to thank all of our colleagues at the Chamber, at TAİK, and at the other organizations who have contributed to bringing this group back together at a time when I think there is, and I can just feel it in the room, quite a bit of optimism and dynamism as we talk about and think about the larger relationship between our two great nations, but also the possibilities that lay before us. And I start with that point because when we step out of this room and look at the headlines of the moment, the day, and think about the many challenges that we are confronting in the world today, the number of challenges, climate change, digital transformation, global health challenges, to name just three, migration. These are challenges that don't lend themselves solely to action by governments. We can't address these issues solely on the basis of a bilateral agreement or even a multilateral agreement. It takes an enormous amount of work between societies. And so when you think about those challenges, when you think about the enormous suffering that has been created by two terrible conflicts with which we are all wrestling and contending and trying to bring to an end as quickly as possible, there's a lot of reasons not to be optimistic. Any of us could look at those headlines and conclude that the trajectory is not very promising at the moment. And so to walk into this room and to feel that sense of optimism and purpose is really important. And I think it speaks to the fundamentals of this relationship, this alliance, this strategic partnership between the United States and Türkiye. And so I'm really pleased to be back with all of you again and to have a chance to share the stage and learn from my colleague, Deputy Minister Akçapar. And hopefully we can give you a good, fruitful conversation this morning. So thank you very much.
Mr. Bes, please stay on the stage. And thank you, Ambassador, for your speech. Now I would like to invite Mr. Ambassador Alper Coşkun, Senior Fellow of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, to moderate the political plenary. The word is yours. And the other panelists, Mr. Ambassador Dr. Burak Akçapar.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I want to dive straight into our conversation with our distinguished speakers. I know that you're all impatient to draw more inspiration from their views. What I'd like to do is, if we can, use this session, ambassadors, as a bridge between what you mentioned, Ambassador Bes, the upbeat atmosphere that is really prevailing in this room. And I think it was wonderful to hear from the business representatives at the highest level who have decades of experience in this relationship, of really the deep-seated quality of the relationship, how it's been trending upwards in trade, in energy, but how there's so much more untapped potential, which I think represents a very refreshing image of the potential of the relationship between Turkey and the United States, which clearly has been overshadowed by the more fraught political state of our bilateral relations, which, however, as of late, is also in an upward swing, which is something that I believe Turkey watchers welcome in terms of having a more stable and productive relationship between Turkey and the United States as long-standing allies, as countries that stood together during the Cold War, and we've almost forgotten about those historical legacies, but who also fought shoulder to shoulder in Korea. The more recent divisive aspects of the relationship between Turkey and the United States have overtaken this memory, and I think it's good occasionally to take a step back and realize that the relationship between Turkey and the United States didn't start when the war in Iraq began, and I cite that because that was sort of the beginning of a more fraught era in bilateral relations. There's a lot more to the story, and I think what our business representatives spoke of in terms of the potential and the actual accomplishments attests to this fact. So what I want to do is pose both of you the same question, two short questions, to see if we can bridge that perspective from the business world to your worlds in diplomacy, which obviously represents the foreign policy outlooks of the two countries. And I'll use a very famous phrase now. Are Turkey and the United States, and I should say Turkey, I apologize, are Turkey and the United States back? Is the relationship back? That would be my first question. And to build on that, I'd also like you to ponder what areas of bilateral cooperation both of you see in the days ahead that can also be a source of inspiration for the business circles and officials that are listening to us today. Welcome. Floor is yours. You can start in any order that you wish. I did forget to make one disclosure, I think out of full transparency. Burak Bey and I went to college together. I've been dying for the opportunity to question him in front of a big audience, so I will use that to the best of my ability.
I was fearing that, yes.
But I'll leave it to you. You can kick off.
You want to go first, John?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, I'm also very much uplifted by this kind of positive atmosphere. There's a lot of energy here that's really giving us courage in tackling some of the more difficult issues of our day and age in the world. One thing is for sure, we actually never went anywhere. So we have always been cooperating, we have always been consulting with each other. We're NATO allies, so this gives us a kind of an institutional framework that governs the whole the relationship. Yes, we have issues where we disagree, and some we disagree in a big way, but the communication on all these channels have never went away. So I think what marks today is this renewed energy as reflected also in this hall, but also reflected in our respective institutions that want to take the relationship even further. Because you mentioned Turkey watchers, for those who have been involved in Turkish-US relations over the course of time, the one thing is for sure, there have always been ups and downs. We are two largest armies, armed forces in NATO. We are huge geopolitical powers. Of course, the United States is a superpower, but we're not too small ourselves. And we have active engagement in active geographies. We're bound to come across disagreements here and there. But it has been working. It will work even better in making use of this current support we've been receiving from the business communities, from the political leaderships. I think we're on the right track.
So I would agree with everything Burak Bey just articulated, and I don't think it's an either or, and I think the better way to describe where we are is I think we're on the cusp of a new phase in the relationship, one that starts with a return to the fundamentals, which are well known in this room with this community, and that the first of those fundamentals is collective defense. We have had, unfortunately, in the last 2 years, a really stark reminder of the importance of our treaty obligations to each other and the power that comes from that solemn commitment to defend each other's territory and security and sovereignty against outright naked aggression. Many of us in our profession spent the first half of our careers working on ensuring that all of our societies would benefit from the collapse of the Soviet Union and the prospect that that would usher in a new period in which we no longer had to contemplate large-scale conflict in Europe and Eurasia. And yet, we've been painfully brought to the past in some respects, to the extent we have had to actively problem solve to deal with a land war in Europe again, something we all hoped would never occur. And yet, the solidarity, the resolve across the alliance, I think has surprised Vladimir Putin, who already has failed in one of his principal objectives, which was to undermine the solidarity of the transatlantic relationship and to exploit seams on issues where different members of the alliance or Europe had differences of views. He's failed at that. And not only has he failed at it, he has bolstered the collective determination of Europe and the transatlantic community to reassert our values and to live our values in defending and supporting the people of Ukraine's ability to live within their sovereign territorial boundaries and make their own decisions about their security relationships, about their system of government, about their economy, all of those kinds of things. So I think we've had, unfortunately, through tragedy, a good reminder of that core foundation in the relationship. But going beyond that, if you look at the work we have been doing to revitalize and to continue to grow and take advantage of wider opportunities to work on some of these global problems. One need only look at the range of activities on the agenda for discussion over the next 2 days. The work that 2 Turkish ministers with their counterparts are undertaking this week to renew our discussions of a trade and investment framework agreement, to explore the opportunities of a new energy and climate dialogue as a vehicle to capitalize on green technologies and growing the green economy. I see enormous reasons to be optimistic about where we're going in this next phase.
I love that, and because we are bridging the upbeat atmosphere from the first session, and I think that really does reflect the reality. What I take from what Ambassador Akçapar said, and I think that's an important point, is that despite the image of division, if you will, or difference in priorities between Turkey and the United States over the recent years, we've never actually gone anywhere. The relationship hasn't gone anywhere, and that's a good reflection of the fact maybe of the maturity of the relationship and its ability to manage these types of differences. But at the same time, of course, Ambassador, you mentioned the fact that we're also in a new era in the relationship, driven by dynamics within Turkey, within the United States, but also by geopolitical realities. And I subscribe to that view. I really do think that the Turkish-US partnership is in need of the definition of a new paradigm for itself. Skeptics, however, when they look at this new atmosphere and the dynamics in the relationship, would argue that the traditional bond between Turkey and the US during the Cold War era particularly after the international landscape transitioned towards a more multipolar era, led Turkey and the United States, led Turkey and the United States to pursue different interests. And I think this was exemplified by marking differences in areas like Syria policy and different priorities that the two countries are pursuing. So how would you square the circle around those that believe that this new era actually represents one in which Turkey and the United States are in more of a transactional relationship with one another rather than acting like like-minded allies who actually see eye to eye on everything? Is there, and you partly answered this by saying it's not an either or, but can you dig a little bit deeper into how the United States, and obviously, Master Akçapar, from your perspective, how Turkey sees the way in which this new paradigm can be managed? Are we ready and mature enough in the relationship to accept on Turkey's part, on the US's part, that we won't always fall in line with one another?
So I'd say a couple of things. You know, when I think back to last year and the outpouring of support from average Americans in responding to the earthquake in southeastern Turkey. You know, I remember visiting the embassy and seeing enormous masses of donations from individual Americans, many of whom had no connection, you know, no immediate connection to Türkiye, but felt compelled to make that effort. And if you couple that with the very rapid response from our government to support at scale, first search and rescue, and then some of the recovery efforts. And let me just take a moment to say to anyone in the room who is on a personal level or in family relationships still recovering from that terrible tragedy, that to me is probably the most dramatic example one could draw to demonstrate that this is not a transactional relationship. That's not the behavior of a country or society who looks at another country strictly in transactional terms. And so I think it's important, and I understand why this happens. It's easy to focus on specific differences, particularly when they involve conflict and violence and the raw human emotion and drama associated with that. And particularly when we're talking about Turkey's immediate neighborhood where there are terrorist organizations who do not respect geographic boundaries and who create dilemmas for our NATO ally. It's easy for people to focus on that and take it out of context and decide that one issue or one problem defines the entire relationship. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think it was the case through some of the really challenging periods we experienced together when Daesh was at its terrible peak in northern Iraq and northern Syria. I don't think it was the case as we worked through some other challenges related to decisions of one government or the other. And so I see a very vibrant relationship that, again, has many opportunities to expand on existing relationships and existing partnerships. I mean, if we just look at the defense sector, we've clearly got a lot we can do together in innovating to look at new technologies. But boy, we've sure seen over the last 2 years the importance of a defense industrial base that can produce, unfortunately, classic munitions and weaponry at volume. And I think we have a lot of work to do together with our NATO allies to deal with this challenge that we are confronting as Russia, with an enormous amount of support from the PRC, is not just rebuilding, but is expanding its defense industrial base in ways that are going to endure in the future. And we're going to have to contend with that collectively together. So, you know, I think there's an enormous amount we will be able to do together, working off the great foundation that we already have.
Master Akçapar, do you share this vision as well, that the relationship is mature enough to cushion these differences?
Absolutely. I think first off, the institutional framework provided by this collective defense is there, it's very firm. And secondly, we're now the first and the third largest diplomatic networks in the world. So basically, we have a very global reach and global interest. But beyond that, perhaps if I were to pinpoint one single center of gravity for geopolitical affairs, that's somewhere around Turkey. A lot of conflicts, a lot of tensions, a lot of commotion is happening around Turkey. Turkey is now sandwiched between two active wars, actually. So much so, well, the issues are vast and the times are changing. There is lots of things are going on. That the fact that the agenda catches up with the agenda that President Erdogan and Biden talk about, Minister Fidan with Secretary Blinken talk about, we at our levels talk about. If you look at this vast agenda that we're talking about, you see that the relationship is not transactional at all. The fact that we care to talk to each other about all these issues and try to streamline, bring our positions closer together, the forge existing mechanisms of cooperation, but perhaps come up with new items and new mechanisms for building cooperation. All this hectic effort means something. In fact, it tells me that we're not exactly transactional. The relationship, one of the strengths of the U.S.-Turkish relationship has been that it has been very adaptive. We have been able to adapt to the post-Cold War circumstances. It was pretty straightforward during the Cold War. The agenda was narrower, the focus was narrower, but the widening of the focus, the widening of the items on our agenda, we have been able to adapt and produce very concrete deliverables. I mean, look at energy security situation. Turkey and the United States in the 90s have created new energy kind of landscape with connecting the Central Asian, Azerbaijani, and other hydrocarbon resources. We're still thinking and talking about such items, even in this age. We're talking about connectivity. There is this fact that the first and two of the three largest economies in the world, China and EU, is situated to the west and east of us. There's this vast space in between these two economic giants. What does it mean for this geography? In economic terms, in political terms, in security terms. We are talking about all these issues with whom? With the United States. The United States also talks with them. So I think all this tells me that we need to maintain the core virtue of the relationship, which is adaptability, and we're adapting. But adaptation is not instantaneous, and I'm sure that we will continue to disagree on a lot of issues. And John will call me, I will call John, or our successors will work on it. The ambassadors, we have fantastic ambassadors in both capitals. They'll be busy. We'll just put out fires, build bridges. This is not going to be an easy thing because we have a lot of capabilities and very high stakes involved in U.S.-Turkish relationship.
And as these things are happening, think tanks will love it because we will have things to write about and think about. And I'm sure that the agenda between Turkey and the United States will never get boring, not necessarily because of the bilateral agenda, which is rich enough in itself, but also because of geopolitics, as you mentioned. And if we travel a little bit back towards Turkey's neighborhood, and Master Akçapar, you mentioned the fact that Turkey finds itself sandwiched between two big wars. You didn't mention, because we were talking about kinetic conflicts, but the uncertainties in Iraq and Syria and so on. So it is a bit of a rough neighborhood, by all means, there's no doubt about that. But I want to talk a little bit about Ukraine, because that obviously has been one of the most important geopolitical disruptions that has really changed mindsets in Europe as well, as you mentioned, whereas the whole idea after the Cold War was expeditionary forces and dealing with other sorts of challenges. War is back in Europe, as NATO and EU strategic level documents also ascertain. And Turkey finds itself in that neighborhood. I'm curious, and I think our listeners would be curious as well. Turkey is in proximity of this conflict. Turkey is a country that had actually been engaging Ukraine in defense cooperation while many European countries and NATO allies were shying away from that. But right now it is a country that hasn't joined the sanctions regime and is maintaining good relations with Russia in that sense. So it has a very unique position, if you will, also as a NATO ally. I'm curious, in your debates, when you talk about the conflict in Ukraine, what is it, Ambassador, that the United States sees in terms of the added value that Turkey can bring to currently managing the conflict, and hopefully with a little bit of optimism, winding it down through peaceful means within Ukraine's territorial integrity? And I would ask the same to you, Ambassador Akçapar. What is it that the Turkish authorities see in terms of cooperating and converging forces with the United States in addressing this challenge?
So I would say, look, Turkey has played an important role in the first 2 years of this conflict, and I think it will continue to play an important role in the next phase. Hopefully there is only one next phase of the conflict. What value does Turkey bring? Well, first of all, it brings the perspective of the neighborhood, of the historical challenges of dealing with Russia over centuries, of being a Black Sea littoral state and having had any number of disagreements, disputes, problem-solving arrangements about conflict and competition over that specific geography, and how to work with neighboring countries to ensure that conflicts don't transcend a certain set of issues or a certain set of geography and impact a much wider community. And so, you know, for starters, the Black Sea Grain Initiative, in which Turkey played an indispensable role in arranging, has had a really profound impact on mitigating the consequences of this conflict for many countries in the global majority who rely on cereal exports from Russia and Ukraine to ensure that their populations are fed and able to, in some cases, to survive. And as we've grappled with a number of the conflicts in Africa, for example, whether it's in Sudan or the lingering effects in Libya, the challenges across the Sahel, you know, a number of those are rooted in food insecurity. So that contribution alone was really important and essential in mitigating the effects of this conflict in recent years. Turkish support bilaterally and through the Alliance for Ukraine's defensive capabilities, their ability to reconstitute combat power, their ability, importantly, to innovate. And I think we see the pace of innovation that is occurring on the battlefield in Ukraine is pretty remarkable. There are some positive dimensions to that. There are some quite concerning dimensions to that. But I think that, again, is an area where those relationships that Turkey had built with the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian companies really played an instrumental role in those initial months when You know, I remember the direction of the narrative about what was going to happen and how quickly that conflict would conclude to Russia's benefit, and none of that happened. And so I think going forward, Turkey and the Turkish government are going to have an important role to play as we work to bring this conflict to a close in ways that, and with a result that does not undermine the core principles of a sovereign people able to make sovereign decisions about their future.
That sounds like a very strong basis for cooperation between Turkey and the United States in the Ukrainian conflict's context as well, Ambassador Akçapar.
Thank you. Well, it certainly is a basis for cooperation, but it's also a basis for complementarity. And I think when we talk about policy, we keep two, criteria in place: cooperation where we can, complementarity in all respects. Yes, our policies are very complementary. One thing I think I should start out with is that this war has been too close for comfort as far as Turkey was concerned. Right across the Black Sea, with direct impact in everything we do, from trade to various other aspects. And Turkey has taken a very early decision to call this war a war, and have been able to stop the return of a number of Russian vessels back into the Black Sea. But we're implementing it for all countries and keeping a certain balance in the Black Sea. So the expansion and escalation of the conflict in the region is kind of contained through our policy to strictly implement this Montreal Convention, which has been very significant for also the sustainability of the grain export from the region. And the grain deal is much talked about. Let me just cite just one recent incident when a mine struck a tanker, and the world food prices jumped by 17% overnight. So 17% for a lot of European countries is a huge burden, but 17% means hunger for the developing world. So the stakes are extremely high, and Turkey's policies to maintain this balance in the Black Sea and open this possibility for the two countries, both Russia and Ukraine, to export their grain and foodstuffs from the sea route is critical. So this kind of exerts on us a certain pressure to continue to be very active in making sure that this balance is there and the food exports continue with or without a deal. Of course, without a deal, what you encounter is that a lot of the ships sail without insurance, without proper insurance, which, for instance, from the vantage point of the Ukrainian farmer, is a disincentive for re-farming. So they have the incentive instead to invest in other things on their territory. So we have to make sure that they see benefit in reharvesting, reseeding these farms. And so in addition to that, there are all kinds of other issues that are kind of part and parcel of this conflict. The war is a big word. When you whittle it down to some smaller parts, you have to talk about nuclear safety. You have to talk about, for instance, the safety of the critical infrastructure. You have to talk about, as part of the critical infrastructure, the ports. There are a lot of items which call for an existing functioning channels of dialogue and negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, and this is where Turkey comes in. From the get-go, we have been able to carve out for ourselves a small niche to set up and maintain a negotiation platform between these two countries. This is happening simultaneously with our very solid contribution to Ukrainian defense effort because, well, we're very straightforward in this. We are staunchly supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. There's no question there at all. But I think when you look at the long haul of Turkish diplomacy, basically, we constantly face the need to balance things out. Occasionally, balance interests, balance perspectives. And I think our diplomatic tradition comes in very handy in this regard. And of course, the president's very strong diplomatic skills and engagement of top leaderships, both in Ukraine and in Russia, is our strongest asset in this regard.
Thank you very much. From the way you described the different aspects of the conflict in Ukraine, where actually Turkey can add value, Ambassador Akçapar, that made me think of the work in progress on the U.S. side to devise a Black Sea strategy, which is a strategy, I believe, that envisages a more comprehensive approach to the neighborhood, and it makes me think that there's room for a lot of cooperation in that context as well. I want to move on a little bit closer to the business.
Ambassador, can I jump in on this?
Yes, please.
I think this is a very important matter. The Black strategy is there already. And actually, we've been able to identify the elements of the new strategy back in Vilnius, when we referred to the upgrading of the capabilities of the literal NATO allies. This is part and parcel of the Vilnius communique. So we are working very concretely in this regard. There is this issue of floating sea mines. Well, if you leave a sea mine up in the north, the currents take it to Istanbul through Romania and Bulgaria. This is how the geography works. And these mines pose a threat for the traffic, but also for human centers, settlements. We have been able to work with the Romanian and Bulgarian colleagues to set up a mine countermeasure force that would tackle this as early as next month. There are more to be done to strengthen the capabilities of the NATO allies. NATO has 3 members as literal states in the Black Sea, and that is the strategy.
Thank you. I do want to move a little bit closer to the business world, if I may. You mentioned the notions of cooperation and complementarity between Turkey and the United States. More, it was in the context of the foreign policy realm, but I think that's something that applies very well, obviously, to the business world as well. And in the previous session, we heard from different representatives the degree of cooperation and elements of complementarity, and how actually that undercurrent was never undermined, if you will, by occasional spikes, ebbs and flows in Turkish-US relations at the political level, which testifies to the fact, I think, that what the business world represents is an input to the stability, to the resilience, and the longevity of the partnership between Turkey and the United States. And I think, given the upbeat atmosphere that was depicted by officials in the previous session, but more importantly, in my view, the appetite that seems to be there to widen and deepen this relationship, there is really a big potential that we need to focus on, both countries need to focus on. And since we're here with the business community, what would the vision or the message that you would like to share with them? What type of inspiration would you like to give to them in terms of what's happening in the political sphere that I think will be a good point of reference for them when they are going into their economic adventures together?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. One, the nature of the business communities, there's a lot of similarities, and I think it's one of the reasons why there has continued to be such a strong, stable partnership, both between large enterprises and some smaller and medium-sized enterprises as well. The dynamism, the vitality, the creativity, the entrepreneurial spirit that I observed in Türkiye from the business community, the adaptability to circumstances, to new opportunities. And also, I think the sort of much wider perspective that Turkish companies bring in looking at markets in 3 and 4 and 5 regions, right? There's an awful lot of overlap in that sort of orientation and approach to business with much of the American business community. So even before companies or trade associations start talking about what, there's already a huge amount of commonality on how. And that, I think, gives a lot of energy and dynamism to prospective future partnerships. I think our obligation in government is to do everything we can to create the right environment for those partnerships to flourish. And I think you're seeing from the United States in a range of ways, but importantly, through our commitment to this energy and climate dialogue, and the complementary efforts to have those conversations, which I know is a big chunk of the focus of this conference, and you'll be hearing, I believe, from my colleague, Ambassador Jeff Pyatt. We see enormous potential for complementary efforts, for shared efforts to work through an entire new set of economic relationships, business relationships around critical minerals, whether that's at the front end or whether that's processing or applied material science associated with them, around incorporating a wide range of technologies into whether it's defense applications, whether it's energy, whether it's other sectors, and also, frankly, thinking about some of the ways we address innovation and developments by adversaries, current or potential, to make sure we're appropriately able to fulfill our obligations in defense. Telecommunications, artificial intelligence. I mean, there's such an enormous range of opportunities right now that I think I'm certainly, as I mentioned earlier, I think I'm optimistic about prospects that this, whether it's investment flows in either direction or partnerships that produce outcomes beyond the bilateral relationship, there's quite significant opportunity.
Before coming to you, if I may just add one aspect to that for both of you. The elephant in the room. Defense industry obviously has sort of been the traditional engine room of the relationship between Turkey and the United States. That's been overshadowed in the past with the sale of the F-16s and that process going into action. I think we're in an upward trajectory, but the elephant in the room is obviously CAATSA sanctions. Do you have anything that you can share with us in terms of unraveling that thorn in the relationship from both sides, actually, if there's anything that you can share with us?
I think what I'd share today is that we are continuing to approach that in our discussions with the Turkish government in the spirit in which we work through and approach other challenges and problems in the relationship, or areas where we don't see eye to eye, to see if we can work out practical solutions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Master Akçapar.
I think my message to the business community is that I think both sides are very keen to make sure that we have a very sustainable, robust, and upward trending business relationship as a main pillar of the relationship. I think the opportunity to do this is greater than ever, because when you look at the Turkish economy and the Turkish companies, they're more competent than ever. They have a global footprint. They're very adaptive. They're very competitive. And they're excellent partners in third geographies, but also in terms of bilateral trade and investment. The opportunities are great, and there's a lot of support for that at the government level. And new areas are coming to the fore, and we are including those new areas, whether it's the green whether it's the digital, whether it's the AI, or even space. All these are part and parcel of what you call the new phase in the Turkish relationship. We are talking about the opportunities, how to seize these opportunities, how to exploit these opportunities. So as the agenda kind of evolves to cover all these areas, the business communities have the opportunity to catch up and bring this forward. I think we are setting very high standard, very high targets for the trade, but also investments. And as we've heard this morning, the people who are in charge of the economy are very supportive of this agenda. They lead this agenda. And I think we should not, the business community should not be swayed by this rather occasionally negative tones in the social media about everything going down the drain. This is not happening. Even on the sanctions side, for instance, we are in very continuous dialogue on the sanctions front. We do not implement U.S. sanctions or the EU third-party sanctions. We only implement U.S. Security Council sanctions. But, and there's a big but there, we do not allow Turkey to be a conduit for the circumvention of these sanctions. So we take very effective measures to make sure that our country is not abused in this context. Some things slip and then we catch it and we take measures. This, however, I think obliges the companies to be very well versed in these regulations so as not to over-comply. And because it's important to leave this white space open for the legitimate trade, and that's going on. That can only be done. I remember the director of the Chatham House, I believe, who said the companies need to have foreign policies. Now, it's not just the governments, but the companies need to have foreign policies. People who understand how to read through these legislations, liaise with the governments, know what's going on in practice, not through social media, but by direct knowledge, and adapt to this regulatory, constantly evolving regulatory frameworks. But we need the business communities to step up on both sides. We need more pillars than just political or geopolitical, military, to sustain this relationship and take it further to the next phase. The defense industry is an area which is particularly, I think, promising. Everything I said about the capabilities of the Turkish companies is valid for in the defense industry sector as well. In this regard, we discussed this again at NATO. If you look at Article 30, let me quote directly of the Vilnius communique, this blue on blue, as the technical term is, an ally imposing restrictions on another ally is not appropriate. And I think we have taken a stance there as all NATO allies to start removing these restrictions to the extent that is politically feasible. And of course, when I say politically feasible, we do recognize that all politics may be local occasionally, if not, and it takes time to convince the congresses, the parliaments, the shareholders. But I think the destination, the direction set by the leaders at the NATO summit is there as a permanent kind of beacon, which tells us that we have to work to remove all these restrictions on the defense trade.
We have 1 minute and 54 seconds and counting. My takeaway from this is you just challenged the business community that they should step up, which obviously is a nice way and a constructive way of suggesting that there's more potential. And I think in the previous session, the business world challenged the political authorities and the officials on both sides in terms of the untapped potential that they see, which is probably the perfect dynamic that any two nations can search for when looking into the future. So that is my takeaway from this. But I do want to ask you one more question within the next 1 minute, and I think you might find it convenient that you don't have much time to answer to this question. What about the Erdogan visit and the Erdogan-Biden meeting? Can we contemplate that taking place on the margins of the upcoming NATO summit? Is there anything in plan, or should we just keep watching for news to come out?
So I would say we're looking forward to hosting and welcoming President Erdogan for the NATO summit. 75th anniversary with a orientation and focus on the next 75 years, where we've got a lot to do together. But I think it's also important to remember that, just as we've been discussing, the relationship transcends any individual singular meeting or interaction, and there continues to be robust communications between Beştepe and the White House, and I'm confident that will continue.
Very well said.
Likewise, very well said. I tried to put him on the spot, but as you can see, he's always been a better diplomat than me. Thank you very much, ambassadors. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join me in a round of applause?